Oh, look, CBR released a new article 10 Worst Trends in Modern Comics. Looks like it's just a list of things people have complained about for years. Turns out, yet again, that Comicsgate was right. For years, comic book pros claimed that anyone critiquing the tendencies of the modern comic book industry just hated change, that critics had no valid points or evidence to back up their claims, that they were just haters who hated anything that was different from the old boys club. In short, plenty of the critics have proven themselves to be lying hypocrites who hate anything that isn't straight, white, and to the right. But that doesn't mean the criticisms were wrong, which is why Comic Book Resources felt perfectly fine publishing this article titled 10 Worst Trends in Modern Comics, or in the translation, everything Comicsgate said was right. Let's get started. Number 10. Some comic books are clearly written to be TV shows and movies. Now, in fairness, this critique didn't get much pushback from the comic book pros, and that's because it's been a noticeable problem since the early 2000s. Far too many indie books appear to be screenplays adapted to comic book format, and I'm using adapted loosely. If you're trying to figure out which books are adaptations, if it's a book with characters just sitting or standing around talking, it's a screenplay. If there's very little action, it's a screenplay. If everyone's eating in every scene, it's a shitty screenplay. Now, the dynamic has changed over the years. Originally, the books were made because the screenplays got rejected. Now it's the reverse. Books are made as a kind of proof of concept. The creator could take it to a studio and claim it's a hit in hopes of getting a deal. I think this is starting to wane, mostly due to people flooding the studios with these books. Since everyone is doing it, the deals are harder to come by. Hopefully this dies out because comics are a medium unto themselves. They shouldn't be a stepping stone to something else. Number 9. Decompression is okay, but comic readers still like shorter arcs. This was one that got some pushback, but I've never understood why. Decompressed storytelling is when the writer tries to make the story move in real time. So instead of having an event happen and jumping 2 weeks later, you show the entire 2 weeks. This was popularized in comics by Brian Michael Bendis, but it was also a trend in film and TV at the time, with shows like 24. There's nothing wrong with decompressed storytelling. It's a great tool when used properly. When it's used in every story, constantly used to show the total minutia of life and to cover up bad storytelling, it gets tiresome. After 2 decades of reading stories like this, I think it's time to let it go. Number 8. The comic industry has seen its genres whittled away. As CBR explains, quote, comics once boasted a wide range of genres, each of which were successful in their own right. Slice of life, adventure, horror, comedy, and superhero comics. Even war stories had active series going, which is where the likes of Sergeant Rock had their origins. In modern comics, there are fewer dedicated genres than ever. War comics are basically non-existent. Fantasy has been incredibly diminished over the years, and horror has been watered down. Key to a thriving industry is good representation and use of genres, which is currently lacking. This is the diversity and representation that the industry needs, which I've said for years, to which comic book pros claim that made me some kind of istophobe. True diversity in comics isn't based on identity politics. It's based on the types of stories you tell. The more genres you have, the broader the pool of talent and potential audience you can gather. Don't take my word for it. Look at manga. This is one of the reasons manga is so successful. You could find manga about anything, from the most fantastic to the most mundane. That alone brings in the political diversity these people claim they want to see, but never support, because those other genres will lend themselves to stories based around other cultures and people. Currently, 70% of American comics are superhero comics, with Marvel and DC publishing most of them. That'll need to change if the comic book industry plans on thriving and not just hiding in a corner until Disney and Time Warner pull the plug on the big two. Number 7. The shrinkage of ongoing books leaves little to invest in. CBR's claim here is that the abundance of A-list character titles are keeping B, C, and D-list characters from having ongoing series. I don't think that's the problem. There are too many Batman, Spider-Man, and X-Men related books, I'll give them that. However, that's not why characters like Animal Man, Commandy, and Howard the Duck don't have ongoing series. They don't have ongoing series because the books don't sell. The audience for those characters either don't exist or lost interest. Only having one Batman book wouldn't fix that. Putting better creative teams on books and letting that team develop over a few years might help, but the main issue is that the industry isn't geared for those kinds of esoteric characters anymore. Part of that is due to sales numbers and prices. People aren't buying lots of comics, and few people want to spend $4 on a book they're really not interested in. If the books were cheaper, people might give a Howard the Duck book a chance. Another part is the creative talent. How many people want to write Commandy stories? Hell, how many of the new writers even know who Commandy is? The final part is the audience. There are already second and third rate characters with ongoing titles: Miles Morales, Ms. Marvel, Captain Marvel, Lesbian Pearl Clutcher. None of these books sell well. The proof of concept is right there. Nothing's stopping anyone from buying these books if they really wanted to. The issue is that they don't want to. Number 6. The multiverse is fun, but there can be too much of a good thing. CBR says about the multiverse idea, quote, "The multiverse is easily one of the coolest ideas ever conceived in comic books. It allows readers to enjoy alternate takes on their favorite heroes and see how their stories might play out if events had gone differently. However, it feels more like a gimmick now than ever. Well, it was always a gimmick. It just worked because it was strategically used. It's been worn out in comics over the last 20 years, and it's even worn out its welcome in the MCU films, and it's barely been 2 years. Elseworld, What If, Old Man Logan, The Dark Knight Returns, Superman Red Sun, Kingdom Come, and Earth X worked because they were one and done. You got the story, they moved on. The moment that the regular comics were constantly dealing with multiverse tales, and when DC and Marvel kept revisiting finished stories, it became the pumpkin spice of the industry, and it was done. It says a lot that Marvel and DC invest as much in these alternate worlds as they do their main universes, and it's not anything good. Number 5. It's time to admit the superhero families are too big. No. You mean there's one too many Spider-Man knockoffs wandering around? Really? Whoever could have said that except everyone with a functioning brain? I love that CBR says that this is one of the worst things that happened while completely ignoring why it happened. The superhero family is an old trope. It goes all the way back to the golden age of comics from the 1940s. The modern version, however, has taken a very particular turn. Holy diversity and representation, Batman. I wonder what it could be. We have 48 gazillion versions of Spider-Man, Batman, Hulk, Superman, and Wolverine because we need to have one of every race, sex, sexuality, and religion, or fans won't be able to see themselves in the characters. This happened to check a box, and now it's created a mess. Like CBR says, quote, "Batman was once thought of as a solitary, brooding hero, yet now boasts the biggest family in comics. The main issue with these families is that titles meant to focus on a specific character can make the hero feel like a guest star in their own book. You think? Somehow, the Batman writers in the 90s managed to make the Bat Family work without it ever feeling like Batman was a guest in his own titles. Maybe you might want to call up some of those writers and ask them how they did it." Number 4. There's no good reason any comic should have dozens of variant covers. Again, you think? People have been saying this for years, including some pros in the industry, but mostly the retailers. The variant covers are just cash grabs, and it's usually the retailers who eat the cost because Marvel and DC will make them order a certain amount of the regular covers as a condition for ordering the covers everyone wants. Some retailers wind up with dozens of books they know they can't sell just to get 5 copies of the variant they won't be able to keep on the shelves. It becomes a bigger issue when it's a 20 variant spread because retailers may have to order variants they know they won't sell on top of the regular covers just to get the variant they actually want. If that sounds retarded, well then, welcome to the comic book industry. No one needs or wants 25 variant covers. The gimmick is dead. Let it rest in peace. Number 3. Fans miss a world that wasn't quite so Batman-centric. This is a recent phenomenon. Batman is DC's best-selling character at the moment, so the Bat books are everywhere. It's like the X books in the 90s, and like Marvel did then, DC Comics is milking those Bat teats for all their Bat milk. They're not going to stop until Batman is Bat dry. So if you don't want any more Bat books, too bad. They're not going to stop until the books stop selling. Number 2. Deconstruction stories have long outstayed their welcome. Ah yes, the trope the pros love because they all think they're Alan Moore. Like CBR said, Moore popularized deconstructing superheroes. For those unfamiliar with the term, deconstruction is when you analyze the tropes, stereotypes, and archetypes within a story, breaking them down to show their foibles and flaws. It can be very interesting, like with Game of Thrones, which deconstructs fantasy stories. The problems arise when you never reconstruct the story. It's fine to say that maybe superheroes shouldn't be trusted because they're just people with powers, but if you leave it there, then you leave the audience with a terrible view of your supposedly heroic characters, and there's nowhere to go but to either further deconstruct what they're seeing, which leads to a bigger mess, or pull a Riri Johnson and subvert expectations with all the retardation that ensues. Watchmen worked because it took heroes and showed them to be flawed and then it ended. You're then left to contemplate the reality of that world. However, if you want to keep coming back to those characters, as you will with most A-list superheroes, you now have heroes who are no different than the villains. Why should the audience root for these people when they're no better than the people they're fighting? And this is coming from someone who prefers darker stories that have more realistic, less hopeful endings. Every story can't be a deconstruction. Every hero can't be borderline amoral. There has to be something good these people are fighting for, something tangible and attainable, and something good about these characters. You can't all retell Watchmen. There's a lot of room between happily ever after and abandon all hope, ye who enter here. Find it and explore. You'll get much better stories if you do. And finally, number one, too many comic events will turn away many readers. Again, another thing people have said for years. It's just crossover after crossover after crossover. No one gets a chance to breathe, to deal with the aftermath of the event, or settle into a new status quo. It's like a WWE pay-per-view event. They're advertising the next one as the current one happens. If you're gonna have some dramatic mega event, let the characters recoup. Hell, that's the kind of thing ready-made for decompressed storytelling. Let's deal with characters in real time for half a year and then wait a while, maybe 2 or 3 years, before popping off the next event. That gives the audience and creators time to explore the new landscape. It also gives new readers a way to jump in without feeling completely lost because they don't recognize some guy who hasn't been in a comic for half a century. Give people who aren't in the know a chance to figure out what's going on. These are things people have said for years, including some in the industry, but nothing has changed. The industry continues to play to these trends even though everyone's tired of them. The big two put out books and the fans just buy them because they're the only news stories featuring their favorite characters. The industry has to get out of this loop if it wants to do more than scrape the bottom of the barrel and stop getting trounced by scholastic books and manga. I will remind people, the final volume of Demon Slayer outsold the entire comic book industry. One volume. There's no reason why Marvel films can make $1 billion per film, but no one buys Marvel comics. That's the biggest problem the industry needs to deal with. Their audience won't read their books. You need to get people to read comics. All these trends do is give people reasons not to read comics. I think it's time for a change. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.